Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel, Colonati. Today I want to talk about 3 short story collections or anthologies that I read in November. I often go for very long periods of time without reading any collections or anthologies, and then suddenly I'm in the mood for short stories and I start all the things. So I didn't mean to be reading like 4 or 5 different collections in November, but I did. So these are the ones that I've finished so far. So the 3 things I'm going to talk about today are The Fox's Tower and Other Tales by Yoon Lee, Mother of Invention edited by Rivqa, Rafael, and Tansy Rayner Roberts, and Silk and Steel edited by Janine A. Southward. So let's begin with the collection of flash fiction, The Fox's Tower and Other Tales. Now, I have to preface this by saying that I'm actually not a fan of flash fiction. I think I read too much very, very bad flash fiction back in the days when I was working for a high school writing program. Yeah. Very, very short form fiction has never really called to me, either to read it or to write it back in the days when I thought I was going to be a writer. So I picked this collection up purely because it's by Yoon Lee, and I have really loved his novels and his short fiction. And I'm really happy to say that he may have single-handedly turned around my opinion on how good flash fiction can be. Most of these stories, I'm gonna say, are magical, like the subtitle says, but I really love that Lee often blends fantasy and science fiction. Very reminiscent, of course, of his Machineries of Empire series, which I think many people view as kind of like fantasy in a sci-fi world. You know, is it math or is it magic? But this, it's sort of like an aesthetic and spec fic that I really enjoy. So like every single one of these stories was just this little jewel, like 1, 2, 3 pages long. I'm not gonna go through them individually because they're so short, and if I describe what they are, I'll describe the entire thing. But I will say that the first couple were incredibly memorable, and my favorite out of the entire collection is The Dragon Festival, which I think pretty much summarizes and encapsulates all the little details that I really love about the blend of fantasy and magic, and just they read like vignettes. Like by the time that you've established the characters and the setting and the problem or whatever, it's over, but he makes them seem like standalone stories. They have a point, they have a theme, even if it's just to make you feel something for a couple of seconds, and I really enjoyed that. There are also illustrations by Yoon Lee in these, which I thought added quite a good touch. There aren't a ton of them, but they're really pretty. I think they're mostly like brush paintings. I'm not sure what that's actually called, but they are very, very beautiful. So I highly enjoyed this, and I'm glad that I bought it on a whim. I would definitely recommend this for fans of Yoon Lee, especially if you have already read some of his short fiction and you know that you like it, or that you just like short fiction in general. This is such a quick and fun read. Next up is Mother of Invention, edited by Rivqa, Rafael, and Tansy Rayner Roberts. This is an anthology themed around invention, like mad geniuses, the inventors and their inventions. A lot of these stories are about artificial intelligence, either the creation of that or from the perspective of an AI. And this is actually really interesting to me, and one of the reasons why I was a bit disappointed that I didn't love this anthology as much as I thought I was going to. Like, what a great idea for an anthology. But ultimately I felt like there were a lot of more darker, disturbing stories in this than I had expected. I wanted more fun ones. I wanted more stories that were kind of about the brilliance and the fun and the adventure of creating something amazing, or the joy of invention and enjoying what you've created and doing something well. But a lot of the stories were, as you might expect about the moral and ethical questions around like creating life or creating something that really affects other people or doing something for the wrong, twisted reasons, that sort of thing. So the stories that I really enjoyed from this were ones I think that were a bit different from that darker mold of the ones that I didn't love as much. But there are a couple that I want to pick out and mention to you because I did really enjoy them, so I will go through these quickly. First, there are two shorter, maybe simpler stories that I really liked because they were very much about creating something and creating because you want to, or from a perspective that was inhuman and not so much about the tragedy or the ethics of things. The first is Junkyard Kraken by D.K. Mock, which is about a scientist who sets out to create a robotic kraken even when they like can't get funding and everything for it. Super enjoyed that this was about basically going off to achieve your dream, to make the thing because you think it's cool and not necessarily because it has a practical use. Then there is Tidefall by Meryl Stenhouse. This is one of the last ones in the anthology, and it's kind of the one that I wish that the anthology had ended on. Like it would have been like the perfect ending story for me. And it is about the AI in a like lighthouse space station very, very far away from the rest of civilization. And it just kind of is watching like the rise and fall of human traffic in the area, and then might be sort of terraforming a nearby planet and observing the evolution of life in the new ecosystem there. And I love the perspective of this, that even though it is about some human tragedy, the perspective of it was an inhuman AI who does not think or feel like humans do, but is also, I'm gonna say, benevolent or benign. It was an interesting perspective. Some of the more complicated stories, An Errant Holy Spark by Bogi Takash. This is probably my favorite thing I've read by Takash. I was really surprised. I'm often kind of meh about some of the concepts in their stories, but this one was really interesting, and it was it's about the raising and evolution of an AI that I think is kind of like being raised as a child, and it's from their perspective, and I feel like it was a very different way of creating an AI child than I had read in a lot of other stories. It kind of broke out of the mold, and it also discussed like concepts of religion, theology, and God in a way that I found really relatable and touching. It was a really good story. I could have done without the framing of it. It kind of begins and ends with references to the main character being kidnapped as like a pretext for them explaining who they are and everything, and I didn't think that framework was necessary, but the rest of it was really good. Then probably my favorite story from this entire anthology is John Chu's Quantifying Trust. It's another one that is more fun and adventurous and about the possibilities of creating AI, but also something that Shannon and I discussed when we were reading this anthology was whether some of the depictions of near future AI were realistic or not. Like, was it actually realistic to try programming an AI in this way, or is that really how a new AI, relatively unsophisticated, would actually behave? And John Chu's story came, I think, the closest to actually portraying the real problems and difficulties with creating an AI. I super enjoyed this one, and there was enough of this sort of ambiguity of the mystery, the question in it, that was both quite amusing, but really interesting as well, like some timey-wimey stuff possibly. It made me think, and it amused me a lot. And the last one that I want to mention is The Revivalist by Karen Warren. This is one of the darker stories with a more disturbing, deeply unethical issue at the heart of it that I did really like. It is about a woman who is basically investigating cold cases like murder victims by taking DNA from like bones and somehow extracting memories and implanting them in robots that she has salvaged or saved from the streets. And like the last memories, the last words of the murder victims are spoken by the robots. Let's completely disregard how unscientific this idea is. I think this particular concept would have worked better. I would have been able to suspend my disbelief better if there had actually been a magical element in this story rather than just being presented as sci-fi. I'm sorry, you cannot get last memories and last words from somebody's DNA. That's just no. But aside from that, I found this story very interesting because I do enjoy the more like forensic anthropology aspect of it, investigating murder cases. Like, I was a huge fan of the Bones TV show for 10 years, guys. I was really into it. So just the premise of this was very interesting. And then the growing realization that what this woman is actually doing and some specific decisions that she makes about how to handle the remnants of these murder victims and of the robots, it's disturbing. Like, I completely disagree with a lot of her decisions. At the same time that it's very interesting because it's like, how would you bring closure? How would you actually find out who a lot of these murder victims are and who their killers were? Like, you want to know that, but can you say that the ends justify the means? So it was another really good food for thought story and an interesting one. So that was Mother of Invention. While I wish that there had been more stories in this that I had enjoyed, there's a lot of variety in it, a lot of different styles and tones. So I think it is an enjoyable read. And I think pretty much everybody who reads this is probably going to get something slightly different out of it. And lastly, I want to talk about Silk and Steel, a queer speculative adventure anthology edited by Janine A. Southward. This was the first pick for the Shorts and Sorcery book club run by my friend Rayner from the Book Finch. I joined in on the group read of this in November and it was a lot of fun. I had been thinking about reading this anthology before it was picked, but then it gave me a perfect excuse to buy it and just blaze through it. What I think you need to know about this anthology going into it is that it really lives up to its title. Like, it's an adventure anthology. It is about cute, fluffy feels, even though it is mostly stories about like lesbian couples. It's not like smutty romance, let's say. It's just fluffy. So there are a bunch of stories in this. I'm not going to describe every single one, but I'll quickly mention the ones that I really enjoyed. And almost all the ones that I enjoyed tended to be on the funnier side of things. So first up is Margot Lie's Guide to Dueling Unprepared by Allison Tam. I think this was a perfect story to begin the anthology. It really set the tone of the cute feels and just the fun and some of the humor, the adventure and everything. I really enjoyed it. Then there is Plan Z by Django Wexler. I think I might have a slightly unpopular opinion about this one. I think the group that was reading it, a lot of people were not super into this story, but it's one of the few sci-fi stories in the collection and I liked it. It was kind of like chaos but with a plan. I liked it. Then there is The Sweet Tooth of Angwar Beck by Ellen Kushner. Yes, this is a one-shot short Riverside story and like I'm primed to love it, right? Like, it's not a perfect story, but the feel of being back in Riverside with the swordsmen and the duels and Catherine Duchess Tremontaine, like it was great. Then probably one of my favorites is Danger Noodle by S.K. Terentiev. I loved this. It made me laugh out loud. It was like a really zany lesbian version of an X-Files episode. I loved it. Then there is The City Unbreachable by Yoon Ha Lee. Once again, loved this story. It is set in, I think, like a different time period of the Machineries of Empire world. It mentions the Heptarchate rather than the Hexarchate, so I think that means it was before times. Interestingly, this is the one story from the collection that I thought did not actually have a romantic element to it. It was a good story. I enjoyed it. Yoon Ha Lee is a fantastic writer, but it felt like the romantic attraction was tacked on literally at the end, and I did not get that. whatever. There's also the epic 5th wedding anniversary of Zane the Barbarian and Tika the Accountant by Elizabeth Davis, which I did enjoy. I don't think it's one of the strongest pieces in this, but once again, kind of like zany chaos with a point, and I kind of liked the couple dynamic in the story. It was fun. It wasn't deep. And then The Parnassian Courant by Claire Bartlett. I guessed how this story was going to end very quickly. The minute that a certain thing was mentioned in relation to dancing, I was like, I know what's gonna happen here. So another one that was pretty fun. And the last story that I want to mention is actually the concluding one of the anthology, and that is The Scholar of the Bamboo Flute by Aliette de Bodard. I thought this was a very interesting story to end the anthology on. It is one of the darker ones. There's some more blood and guts and anguish and trauma in this story, even though it is also about love. What I really liked about this, I mean, aside from the fact that Aliette de Bodard is a great writer, and I think this is one of my favorite stories by her, it's that out of all the stories in this collection, which are about love and couples and all of that, this one is pretty explicitly about consent and being able to revoke consent, which I think is really important to talk about. So, thoroughly enjoyed. My verdict on this entire anthology is that it was really good fun, and there were certainly stories in it that I didn't really like, some that I kind of skim read, but overall it left me feeling happy and excited, and I always wanted to come back and read one more story, and that's a great feeling. So that is it for the short fiction collections that I read in November. If you have read these, or if you are interested in any of these stories, please leave me a comment down below. I would love to hear from you. Thank you for watching as always, and I'll be back to talk to you again soon, and until then, bye.